Emily Foster had never looked like the kind of cadet who would someday become a fighter pilot. At just over 5 feet tall, with a slim frame and a face that seemed too gentle for military life, she drew second glances the first day she arrived at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Her classmates strode across the parade ground with athletic confidence, their voices loud, their steps crisp. Emily moved quietly, her pace deliberate, almost reserved. She wasn't shy, at least not in the way people thought. She was calculating, observing, already taking mental notes about everyone around her. "Looks like someone brought their little sister," a tall cadet muttered as Emily passed by on induction day. Laughter followed. Emily didn't react, not outwardly. Instead, she squared her shoulders and kept walking. The truth was, she had expected this. Her entire life, people had underestimated her. Emily grew up in a small Midwestern town where football reigned supreme, and dreams rarely stretched past the county line. Her father worked long hours as a mechanic, her mother as a school secretary. Money was tight, but her parents never discouraged her curiosity. Emily devoured books about aviation, radar systems, and military history, while other kids obsessed over prom or video games. Her fascination began the day she saw a pair of fighter jets streaking across the sky during a county fair air show. The roar of the engines rattled her chest. But what truly hooked her was the way the jets vanished into the clouds, impossible to track. "How do they just disappear?" she asked her father. "They don't," he replied, wiping grease from his hands. "But the best pilots? They might as well." From that moment, Emily was hooked. She wasn't interested in being flashy or loud. She wanted to be the kind of pilot who could move unseen, a ghost in the sky. At the academy, that dream quickly became a source of mockery. During one of the first orientation sessions, cadets introduced themselves by stating where they were from and what they hoped to specialize in. "Engineering, sir," one cadet barked. "Intelligence analysis, sir," another shouted. "Stealth combat aviation, sir," Emily said simply. The room broke into laughter. One cadet actually clapped sarcastically. Another leaned back in his chair and said, "Good one. Stealth's for Top Gun fantasies, not rookies." Emily's face didn't change. She repeated, clearly and firmly, "Stealth combat aviation, sir." The laughter stung, but she refused to let it show. That night, alone in her dorm room, she pulled out a battered notebook filled with sketches of radar signatures, aircraft schematics, and scribbled notes from years of obsessive study. She reminded herself that the same people laughing now would someday watch her prove them wrong. Life at the academy was relentless. Mornings began before dawn, with cadets running across the frosted ground of Colorado Springs. Emily's shorter legs meant she was often at the back of the pack, gasping for air, pushing her body to its limits. During survival training, she barely managed to drag herself through grueling obstacle courses, her uniform soaked in sweat and mud. Instructors weren't cruel, but they weren't forgiving either. One captain pulled her aside after a drill and said bluntly, "Foster, you need to face reality. You're smart, but this program is going to eat you alive if you can't keep up physically." Emily nodded politely, but said nothing. Inside, her jaw tightened. She had heard those words in different forms her entire life. "You're too small. You're too quiet. You're not built for this." And every time, she had pushed back in the only way she knew, through relentless preparation. Her strength wasn't in brute force. It was in the classroom, and more importantly, in the simulator. The first time she sat in the F-16 simulator, gripping the controls, her heart pounded. For a moment, she feared she would be swallowed by the complexity, dozens of gauges, screens, and flashing indicators. But then, muscle memory kicked in. She had studied these systems long before arriving at the academy, poring over manuals and declassified documents late at night while her friends slept. The simulated mission was simple: evade enemy radar and reach a designated point. Most cadets blundered, their jets lighting up on the enemy's screens like fireworks. Emily, however, slipped into the shadows. She adjusted her altitude, hugging the terrain so closely the simulator's warning systems buzzed. She shifted power to minimize her radar cross-section, flying a route she had memorized from hours of studying terrain maps. Enemy radar swept past, catching nothing. When she finally emerged at the target point, invisible and undetected, the instructor froze. "Cadet Foster, run that again." She did, and again, each time flawless. By the end of the session, the room was silent. Word spread quickly among the instructors, though not among her peers. To her classmates, Emily was still the quiet cadet who couldn't finish a run without stumbling. In the mess hall, she overheard whispers. "She'll never make it. Simulator's not real combat. She's just book smart." Emily didn't respond. Instead, she kept training. Nights stretched long as she pored over radar studies, aircraft stealth profiles, and combat reports. She filled notebooks with hand-drawn radar cones, calculated approach angles, and memorized enemy detection patterns. While others laughed or played cards in the dorms, Emily built herself into something more dangerous than anyone realized. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of drills, she sat alone under the shadow of the academy's chapel. Her legs ached, her hands were raw, and exhaustion pressed heavily on her shoulders. She wondered, briefly, if maybe everyone was. Right, maybe she wasn't cut out for this. But then she looked up. In the distance, a flight of jets carved white streaks into the sunset sky. She imagined herself among them, silent and unseen, carrying out missions nobody else could. The vision burned in her chest. "No," she whispered aloud. "I'm not quitting. Not now. Not ever." Her classmates would continue to mock her. For months, the nickname Paper Pilot circulated, a jab at her supposed fragility. But Emily wore it silently, almost like armor. She didn't need to prove herself in words. She would prove herself in the only place that mattered, the sky. Her time was coming. She could feel it. What they didn't know was that the quiet, underestimated cadet already possessed something they lacked, an obsession with stealth so deep it bordered on instinct. Emily Foster wasn't just preparing for tests or training drills. She was preparing for war. And when that day arrived, she would be ready. Emily Foster's second year at the academy was where the program truly began to grind cadets down. The glamour of wearing a crisp uniform faded, replaced by exhaustion, bruises, and the constant pressure of proving oneself every single day. For Emily, it meant waking before dawn, pulling on boots that never seemed to fully dry from the day before, and forcing her body through grueling drills that left her muscles trembling. By sunrise, sweat already soaked her uniform. She was small. Yes, but not weak. Still, the Academy's physical standards weren't designed with her frame in mind. Long-distance runs left her gasping near the back. Obstacle courses felt like walls designed to break her will. And the instructors noticed. "Foster," a sergeant bellowed one morning during endurance training. "The convoy doesn't wait for stragglers. Move it," her lungs screamed for. Air, every step pounded like a hammer against her legs. Yet she refused to stop. She crossed the finish line last, face pale, vision spinning, but she crossed it. Always. Cadets talk. Whispers floated in the dorm halls, in the mess line, even. In the classroom. She's not built for this. She'll wash out before graduation. She should have gone intel, not flight. Emily heard it all. She learned not to react. Instead, she absorbed it, letting every doubt sharpen her focus. For every insult, she spent an extra hour in the gym. For every laugh, she spent another. Late night buried in study. Her notebooks grew heavier, filled with sketches of radar systems and stealth tactics. She copied data from every unclassified manual she could find, handwriting diagrams until her fingers ached. One cadet, passing her room late at night, muttered to another, "She's studying again? Freak." Emily didn't look up. Her pen kept moving. Where Emily struggled in the gym, she thrived in the simulator. The simulator wasn't a game. It was a crucible. Dozens of controls, blinking screens, and constant alarms designed to overwhelm cadets. Most panicked, overcorrecting until their jet was lit up like a Christmas tree on enemy radar. Emily, though she was different. The first time she sat in the dark cockpit, helmet snug over her head, her pulse raced. But her hands didn't shake. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind for years, sitting at her desk back home with open books and old aviation manuals. When the simulated mission began an enemy radar sweep searching for her, Emily didn't climb high like the others. She dropped low, hugging the simulated terrain. Warning lights flickered. Terrain collision alarms screamed, but she ignored them. Her eyes stayed fixed on the radar screen. She cut her throttle just enough to minimize her radar signature. Adjusted her angle. Waited. The radar sweep passed over her position and didn't see her. Target undetected, the simulator computer confirmed. Emily smiled. Her instructor leaned forward, arms crossed. "Run it again," he ordered. She did. Same result. Again. Perfect. "Foster," the instructor said after her fourth flawless run, "how in the hell are you doing this?" Emily shrugged. "I studied, sir." The man shook his head, incredulous. Studied what? Ghost tactics? The truth was, Emily had been preparing for years. She understood radar cones, cross-sections, and stealth patterns better than most of her instructors. To her, the simulator wasn't overwhelming. It was familiar. Word spread among the instructors. Foster was different. She wasn't the fastest, the strongest, or the loudest, but she was the most precise. Her peers, however, didn't share the same admiration. During a rare break in training, a group of cadets lounged on the grass outside the dorms. Someone tossed a football back and forth. Conversation drifted to simulator scores. Whisper. "Aced it again," one cadet grumbled, using the nickname they'd begun throwing around. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything. She can't even carry her gear without looking like she's gonna collapse. She's book smart, that's it. Out here, in the real world, that won't save her." Laughter followed. Emily passed by, water bottle in hand. She caught every word. She said nothing, only nodded politely as if she hadn't heard. But inside, her resolve burned hotter. Not everyone mocked her. One evening, Lieutenant Colonel Harris, an instructor known for being brutally honest, pulled her aside after another. "Simulator drill. You've got talent," he said bluntly. "Not the kind that comes from luck. The kind that comes from obsession. But talent won't carry you when you're strapped into a real jet, heart racing, enemy missiles screaming toward you. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "You need to push harder. Build your body to match your mind. Or else you'll never get to show anyone what you can really do." Emily nodded. She didn't take it as criticism. She took it as a challenge. From then on, her nights grew longer. She trained until her arms shook, ran until her lungs begged for mercy, then studied until her eyes blurred. Her dorm room light burned later than anyone else's. She taped diagrams of radar sweeps to her walls, filling every inch with lines, arrows, and notes in her cramped handwriting. Other cadets hung posters of athletes or celebrities. Emily's walls looked like the inside of a war room. When her roommate once asked, "Why are you doing all this?" You could just relax a little, Emily replied softly, because I don't want to be average. Her breakthrough came during a squadron-wide simulation exercise. The scenario: hostile forces advancing on a U.S. base. Multiple cadets were assigned to protect it. Most were detected and shot down within minutes. Emily? She lasted over an hour. Invisible. Unseen. Enemy radars swept, fired, scrambled, and missed her every time. She struck surgically, eliminating threats without exposing herself. When the simulation ended, she emerged from the cockpit, helmet under her arm, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. The room was silent. Her instructor finally spoke. "Cadet Foster, you just accomplished something I've never seen here before." Emily only nodded, her face unreadable. That night, as she walked back across the darkened campus, she allowed herself a small smile. The others still doubted her. They would still laugh, still whisper, still dismiss her as weak. But she knew something they didn't. When it came to stealth, she was already operating on another level. And someday soon, she would get her chance to prove it, not in a simulator, not in a classroom, but in the open sky, where the stakes were life or death. For now, she kept quiet. Because ghosts don't announce themselves. They wait, and then they strike. Graduation day at the Air Force Academy was supposed to feel triumphant. For Emily Foster, it was complicated. Her classmates celebrated loudly, families waving flags and snapping photos, cadets tossing caps into the air like they were bulletproof. Emily stood off to the side, her diploma in one hand, her hat still tucked neatly under her arm. She smiled faintly for the cameras, but her mind wasn't on the ceremony. It was on what came next. Training had been brutal. She'd endured endless doubt and quiet ridicule, but she had made it. Against every whisper of failure, she had earned her wings. Now, the real proving ground awaited. Active duty. Her assignment orders came sealed in a thick folder, the Air Force crest stamped boldly. On the front, she opened it alone in her dorm room. F-16 Fighting Falcon, 77th Fighter Squadron. Overseas deployment. Her heart raced. The F-16 was no stealth fighter like the F-22 or F-35, but Emily knew how to make it sing. She had spent years memorizing every contour of its frame, every weakness, every trick to minimize its radar signature. In her hands, the Falcon would become a ghost. Still, she knew the challenge ahead wasn't just the machine. It was the people. The 77th Fighter Squadron had a reputation. Hardened, competitive, fiercely proud. Many of its pilots had combat experience. They weren't eager to welcome a fresh academy graduate, especially not one as unassuming as Emily. Her arrival at the squadron's overseas base confirmed her fears. The hangar smelled of jet fuel and scorched metal. Pilots lounged around briefing tables, flight suits unzipped, helmets resting on chairs. They were loud, confident, crackling with bravado. Emily walked in, small frame swallowed by her gear. Bag and the chatter dipped. One pilot muttered under his breath, not quietly enough, "Is she here to fly or to file paperwork?" Another smirked. Hope she brought a booster seat for the cockpit. Laughter rippled through the group. Emily kept her eyes forward, spine straight. She had heard it all before. Introductions were made. She stated her name, rank, and background. When the commanding officer asked if she had a preferred call sign, the pilots chuckled. Call signs weren't chosen, they were earned, often with a story attached. But one veteran pilot, a broad-shouldered major named Russo, leaned back and said, "She hardly talks. She disappears in the corner. Whisper suits her." The name stuck instantly. Some meant it as a jab, mocking her quiet presence. But Emily accepted it. To her, Whisper wasn't an insult. It was prophecy. Her first weeks, with the squadron were grueling. Flights in the desert heat tested endurance. Long hours in the simulator sharpened reflexes. Night operations left her stumbling to her bunk long after midnight. She never complained, but skepticism followed her everywhere. During a briefing, when assignments were handed out, a captain asked loudly, "Sir, do we really want Whisper on wing?" "This isn't a classroom," Russo chuckled. "Yeah, don't put her in a knife fight." "She fold." The room laughed. Emily said nothing. She memorized the flight plan, absorbed every instruction, and left without protest. That night, she studied. Again and again. Her first training sortie came under the blazing sun. The mission: evade radar, strike a mock target, and return undetected. Paired with another pilot, Emily climbed into her jet, nerves buzzing but hands steady. The cockpit felt like home. She whispered to herself, as she had countless times before, "You belong here." Once airborne, her wingman rocketed ahead, climbing high. Predictably, he was detected within minutes. Emily dropped low. She skimmed the desert floor, adjusting her angles to reduce radar reflection. She cut speed, then climbed sharply through a blind zone in the sweep. In the control tower, evaluators leaned closer. "She's invisible," one muttered. Minutes later, the target blinked red, destroyed by Emily's precision strike. She returned to base with fuel to spare, undetected until the very end. When she landed, silence greeted her. Her wingman, still sweaty and frustrated, shook his head. "How the hell did you do that?" Emily only replied, "I flew the mission." Her fellow pilots grumbled, dismissing it as luck. But whispers began circulating. Some were mocking, some begrudgingly impressed. Either way, her call sign fit. More than ever, Whisper wasn't just quiet. She was unseen. Then came her first real deployment mission. The squadron was tasked with protecting a convoy moving through hostile airspace. Intelligence suggested enemy aircraft were preparing an ambush. The briefing room buzzed with tension as pilots studied maps, coordinates, and contingency plans. Emily sat in the corner, helmet resting on her lap, listening intently. "This is serious," Russo said. "They'll swarm us. Numbers game. We'll have to hold them off until the convoy clears." A captain scoffed. "Better hope Whisper stays out of the way. We can't babysit rookies today." Laughter again. Emily's gaze didn't flicker. She knew better than to defend herself with words. The sky would be her answer. The convoy launched at dusk. Emily's jet taxied onto the runway, engines roaring. As she took off, the desert stretched endlessly below, painted in crimson light. Her radio crackled with chatter pilots barking updates, checking in, steadying nerves. Then the call came. Multiple bogies inbound, 15 strong. They're closing fast. The radar screens lit up with enemy signatures. Emily's heartbeat slowed, not sped up. Her hands moved with calm precision. She pulled her jet low, vanishing beneath the radar horizon. "Where's Whisper?" her squadron leader demanded. No answer. She was already gone. High above, the enemy formation roared toward the convoy. Confident, overwhelming, until one jet exploded in a flash of fire. Then another. Panic spread across enemy comms. "Who's hitting us?" But they saw nothing. Their screens were empty. The sky was silent. In her cockpit, Emily guided her jet like a phantom, firing with surgical accuracy, vanishing before anyone could react. Her squadron, still struggling against the swarm, listened in stunned silence as kill confirmations echoed. One after another. Whisper wasn't a liability. She was their salvation. When the last enemy jet fell, silence filled the radios. The convoy was safe, not a single loss. Back at base, Emily climbed from her cockpit, helmet tucked under her arm. She was drenched. in sweat but calm, almost serene. Pilots who had laughed at her now stared wordlessly. Russo approached, shaking his head with disbelief. "Whisper," he said quietly. "Damn ghost in the sky." Emily didn't smile, didn't gloat. She only whispered to herself, barely audible over the roar of cooling engines. This is just the beginning. The desert night was alive with tension. Emily sat strapped in her F-16, helmet visor down, breathing slow and steady as her squadron formed up above the convoy. The vehicles below crept along the dusty road, headlights dimmed, engines humming. Like a nervous heartbeat. Every pilot knew the enemy was coming. It was just a matter of when. The radio crackled. Bogies inbound, 15 strong. Repeat, 15 hostile aircraft approaching fast. 15 against 8. The odds weren't good. Her squadron leader's voice cut through the static. Stay sharp. Protect the convoy. Do not let them through. Emily's hands tightened on the controls. The radar screen lit up with enemy signatures. They were closing in like a swarm, confident in their numbers. Her fellow pilots exchanged terse updates, voices clipped with adrenaline. "Whisper, take position left flank," came the order. "Copy," she replied softly. Instead of climbing to meet the threat head-on, Emily dropped her jet low, hugging the terrain. Hills and ridges became her cover. She adjusted her throttle, angled her nose just right, and her F-16's radar signature nearly disappeared. In the control room miles away, officers frowned. "Where the hell is Foster? She's vanished from our screens." That was exactly the point. The enemy formation bore down on the convoy, their chatter arrogant and unhurried. They believed they had the sky in their grip. Then Emily struck. Her first missile sliced through the night, a white-hot streak that found its mark. An enemy jet erupted in flames, spiraling down into the desert. Confusion exploded over enemy comms. Who fired? Where did that come from? Before they could react, Emily was gone again, dropping altitude, sliding into the blind spot of their radar sweeps. She circled wide, silent as shadow, and came up behind the formation. Another missile locked, fired, destroyed. 2 down. Her squadron leader's voice trembled with shock. "Whisper, is that you?" "Affirmative," Emily said calmly. The battle fractured into chaos. Enemy jets broke formation, searching wildly for the invisible attacker. They fired into empty air, flares streaking uselessly across the darkness. Emily moved methodically, weaving through the night sky with practiced precision. Her training, her endless nights of study, her obsession with radar evasion, all of it converged in this moment. She was no longer just flying. She was hunting. 3, 4, 5 kills, each strike surgical, each escape flawless. Her squadron could hardly keep up with the unfolding spectacle. Inside her cockpit, Emily's heartbeat stayed steady. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. Her breathing matched the rhythm of her maneuvers. She had rehearsed these moments countless times in simulators, in notebooks, in her imagination. Now it was real, and she was untouchable. Enemy voices crackled, desperate. "We can't see her. Where is she?" "She's not on radar check." "You're 6. Panic consumed them. The more frantically they searched, the easier they were to strike. Emily darted in and out like smoke, firing, vanishing, striking again. By the time the enemy realized they were facing something beyond their comprehension, half their force was already gone. On the ground, soldiers in the convoy looked up, jaws slack. They saw jets exploding one after another, but never the ghost who struck them. "Someone up there's protecting us," a young private muttered, awe in his voice. In the command center, senior officers stared at the mission feed. "Who's doing this?" one demanded. The answer came in a single word from the radio. "Whisper." It wasn't just a call sign anymore. It was a legend being written in real time. Emily lined up her next target. Sweat dripped down her temple, but her hands never wavered. She fired, broke away, and disappeared once more. Her jet seemed to vanish into the night itself, like the desert shadows swallowed it whole. 9, 10, 11. The numbers climbed, impossible to ignore. Her squadron, initially skeptical, now rallied behind her. With the enemy distracted and terrified, the others pressed the attack with renewed confidence. But it was Emily who turned the tide. She didn't just fight. She dominated. The last enemy pilot, panicked and alone, tried to break away. Emily pursued, her F-16 closing the distance like a predator stalking prey. She locked on, fired, and ended it. 15 hostile jets had entered the fight. None remained. Her radio went silent for a long, stunned moment. Then her squadron leader's voice finally came through, hushed, almost reverent. Whisper. You just took out an entire squadron. Emily didn't gloat, didn't cheer. She only replied in her quiet, steady tone. Convoy is secure. Mission complete. Back at base. Her landing was met with silence. Mechanics paused their work. Pilots stood still, helmets under their arms. All eyes followed as Emily climbed down from her jet. Her boots touched the tarmac. She removed her helmet, tucking it under one arm, her expression calm. The men who had mocked her, doubted her, dismissed her as fragile, now stared with something else in their eyes: fear, respect, awe. Russo, the veteran who'd once called her whisper in jest, approached slowly. He stopped a few feet away, shaking his head. You're not a whisper, he said. You're a storm. Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, the base was electric with whispers of its own. One pilot had taken out 15 enemy aircraft, alone, with an F-16 that wasn't even designed for stealth. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. Every kill confirmed. Every maneuver logged. In the quiet of her quarters, Emily finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She sat on the edge of her bunk, helmet resting at her side, and closed her eyes. The echoes of engines and explosions still rang in her mind, but beneath it all was calm. She had been underestimated all her life. Not anymore. The desert dawn brought a pale light over the convoy's path, but there was no rest for Emily Foster. Even after the previous night's astonishing victory, the enemy threat had not dissipated. Intelligence reports indicated a second wave of hostile aircraft approaching, this time with heavier ordnance and faster interceptors. Most pilots were jittery, adrenaline still lingering from the chaos, but Emily sat in her F-16, calm and focused. Her jet hummed beneath her, a precise extension of herself. Every switch, throttle adjustment, and gauge memorized like a familiar song. Her squadron prepared for the sortie, tension thick in the air. Whisper, status check, Russo's voice came through the radio. Ready, sir, she replied quietly, her voice steady, almost serene. The hangar crews had seen her landing last night, the stunned looks of her fellow pilots, and now whispered among themselves, half in disbelief. Emily's calm presence was unsettling, yet magnetic. She didn't boast, didn't glare at those who had doubted her. She simply existed in the cockpit, ready. The enemy formation appeared on radar 13 jets, smaller than the previous assault, but faster and more aggressive. They had likely studied the initial engagement, assuming the first attack was a fluke. Emily's wingman, a senior pilot, named Daniels, voiced what everyone else thought. I can't believe they're coming back. And we're outnumbered again. Emily's response was a simple, almost imperceptible nod in her helmet. Words were unnecessary. She had a plan. She would strike invisibly, systematically, and emerge without a scratch. As the F-16 climbed into position, The sun glinted off the wings of the incoming enemy jets. Their formation was tight, precise professionals, trained for a kill, yet they didn't know Emily Foster existed. To them, she was nothing. She dropped low, skimming the terrain, letting the desert's shadows hide her from radar. Her first target appeared on the display, an interceptor straying slightly from the formation. Emily adjusted her angle, throttled down to reduce heat signature, and fired. A missile streaked silently and hit the target. It spiraled into the sand, leaving the enemy confused and panicked. Where the hell did that come from? One voice shouted over the comms. Emily already had the next target in sight. She maneuvered behind a ridge, vanished from the radar, and reappeared directly behind the unsuspecting jet. Missile fired. Another target eliminated. 2 down. Her precision was mechanical yet fluid. Each kill followed the last with terrifying accuracy. She didn't need luck. She had memorized flight paths, studied radar blind spots, and internalized enemy maneuvers. Her hands never trembled. Her focus never wavered. The squadron watched from a distance, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Pilots who had mocked her now struggled to breathe, their eyes wide with disbelief. Whisper had become an unstoppable force. Her movements weren't random. They were a calculated pattern, designed to maximize effect while minimizing exposure. The enemy attempted to adjust, splitting formation, sending interceptors toward the convoy, but Emily anticipated every shift. She flowed around their tactics like water, striking where they were weakest. By mid-sortie, 5 enemy jets were gone, their wreckage burning in the desert below. Enemy communications were frantic, chaotic, panicked. "I can't see her. Where is she?" "Shoot at anything." Emily remained calm. Her breathing was measured, her hands light on the controls. She had fought in simulators, imagined these situations for years, and now, each action was the embodiment of preparation meeting opportunity. A missile streaked from her jet, another target obliterated. 7, then 8, then 9. Her wingman called out in awe. How is she doing this? Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Every moment mattered. Every second of hesitation could allow the enemy to strike back. She simply flew, striking with invisible precision. As the enemy numbers dwindled, their desperation grew. Missiles fired blindly into the sky. Jet after jet broke formation, trying to flee, only to be intercepted by Whisper's methodical attack. Her tactics weren't flashy. They were invisible artistry. She alternated altitude, used terrain masking, timed her throttle to avoid infrared detection, and attacked the enemy systematically. The enemy formation collapsed from within. 15 jets had entered the battle. By the time the dust settled, she had eliminated 11, unscathed. She did not celebrate. The convoy was safe, and that was enough. The final wave of enemy aircraft attempted to regroup, sensing their advantage slipping away. Emily's radio crackled as her squadron leader's voice broke through. "Whisper? Status?" She replied in the same calm tone. 11 down, convoy secure. Remaining threats under control. She adjusted her flight path and began circling back, keeping the enemy in sight. Her strategic patience allowed her to pick off the remaining jets, each strike calculated, each kill precise. She avoided unnecessary maneuvers, conserving energy, and keeping the upper hand. By the end of the sortie, Emily had single-handedly destroyed the enemy's air force for that engagement. Back at base, Emily's landing was met with stunned silence. Mechanics froze mid-task, pilots stopped mid-step, and even Russo, standing several feet away, stared slack-jawed. "Whisper," he finally said, his voice low, almost reverent. "You just turned the impossible into reality." Emily removed her helmet, hair matted, face streaked with sweat and grime. She didn't smile or boast. She simply exhaled, letting herself relax for the first time that morning. Her squadron, previously skeptical, approached slowly. Some extended hands, some offered awkward nods of respect. Words failed them, and she didn't mind. Whispers. Reputation had grown, not through speech, but through action. After debriefing, Emily sat alone, reflecting on the mission. The numbers were staggering. 11 confirmed kills, convoy intact, no injuries, and her jet untouched. She allowed herself a moment to absorb the magnitude. Every second of late-night study, every bruise from training, every whispered insult she had endured, all of it had led to this. For years, people had doubted her, called her fragile, called her quiet, called her a joke. And now, they would remember her differently. Whisper was no longer just a call sign. She was a force that others would fear and respect. A pilot who could disappear and strike with lethal precision. Her mind, however, remained disciplined. Emily knew the war wasn't over. The enemy would learn from this engagement. They would adapt, become more cautious, more aggressive, more dangerous, but she also knew she would adapt. Her preparation, intelligence, and precision were her greatest weapons, far beyond brute strength or bravado. As she prepared for the next mission, Emily felt a quiet satisfaction, not pride, not glory. Satisfaction in knowing that her years of dedication, patience, and study had culminated in something tangible. Protection for those who relied on her, victory for those who couldn't defend themselves, and a reminder to the world that determination and skill could overcome any doubt. That night, Emily walked across the airfield alone, the desert wind tugging at her uniform. The stars stretched endlessly above, silent witnesses to the battles she had fought. Somewhere, distant engines hummed as other aircraft landed or took off. She paused, looking up at the sky she had mastered. No one cheered. No one clapped. She didn't need them to. She had already proven herself in the only way that mattered. And somewhere deep inside, Emily Foster allowed herself the thought. She had carried through every hardship, every insult, every challenge. She was ready for anything. The sun had barely risen over the desert horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold when Emily Foster returned to the base after another long night mission. The convoy she had protected was safely beyond hostile territory, and the intelligence reports confirmed what everyone already knew. The enemy had suffered devastating losses. 15 jets lost in a single engagement, 11 destroyed by Emily herself. The numbers were staggering, almost unbelievable. Yet the air at the base wasn't filled with celebration. Instead, there was a tense awe. Pilots whispered as she walked past, some daring a glance, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Her jet sat in the parking area, engines cooling, the metal gleaming faintly in the rising sun. Mechanics and ground crew paused mid-task, exchanging wide-eyed looks. Whispers of, "She did it again," and "How is she still untouched?" circulated like wildfire. Emily stepped out of the cockpit, helmet in hand, face streaked with sweat and grit. Her expression remained calm, measured. She didn't smile. She didn't boast. She had no need. Her actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. Russo, the veteran pilot who had first given her the call sign, approached slowly, his face a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "You didn't just fly," he said quietly, almost reverently. "You rewrote what we thought was possible." Emily nodded faintly. The convoy is safe. That's what mattered. Inside the squadron's operations center, the briefing room buzzed with activity. Senior officers pored over radar logs, cockpit recordings, and mission transcripts. Each detail confirmed the impossible. One pilot had dominated a full enemy strike without a single scratch to her aircraft or a casualty among the convoy. "Cadet Foster," an officer murmured, shaking his head. How does one person achieve this? She's not a cadet anymore, another replied. She's something else entirely. The legend of Whisper was no longer confined to whispered jokes or the mocking remarks of skeptics. It had become a tangible reality. Across channels, intelligence reports circulated upward, reaching command centers far beyond the squadrons. Small desert base. Meanwhile, Emily returned to her dorm-like quarters, stripped of flight gear, and sank onto her bunk. The adrenaline from the mission still pulsed through her veins, but beneath it all was a calm satisfaction. She had done exactly what she trained to do. She had prepared for years to be ready for this moment, and the results had been undeniable. Letters, reports, and messages began trickling in. Soldiers from the convoy sent their gratitude, some in simple notes, others in drawings and letters. Emily read them quietly, a small warmth spreading across her chest. They didn't know her personally, yet her actions had ensured their safety. In that quiet, private space, she allowed herself a fleeting moment of pride. Word reached her squadron that senior officers from higher commands had requested briefings and mission debriefs. Emily would be summoned to explain, to recount what had happened in detail. Most pilots dreaded this kind of attention, was nerve-wracking, filled with scrutiny and judgment. Emily, however, felt only a quiet readiness. She had trained for this, and now she would show the proof, without embellishment. When she arrived at the debrief, the room fell silent. Generals, commanders, and officers crowded the screens displaying the night's engagements. Emily stood at attention, helmet removed, and spoke clearly, describing every maneuver, every calculation, every decision. Her eyes were calm, unwavering, as she outlined the methods she had used to evade detection and strike targets. At first, the officers were skeptical, glancing at each other, murmuring under their breath. But as the cockpit recordings played, showing the precision of each missile strike and the methodical collapse of the enemy formation, disbelief transformed into respect. After the debrief, a senior general approached her. He was tall, imposing, with eyes that seemed to read into the soul. "Cadet Foster," he began, his tone formal but edged with admiration. "I've seen a lot of pilots in my time, but what you accomplished last night is unprecedented. You are one of the finest examples of skill, preparation, and composure I have ever witnessed. The Air Force will remember this engagement for decades." Emily nodded quietly, her expression unreadable. She didn't seek praise. She sought precision. She sought mastery. And she had achieved it. Back at the squadron, the reaction among her peers was mixed. Some, those who had once mocked her or doubted her abilities, now kept their distance, unsure of how to approach the pilot who had become a legend overnight. Others, younger pilots, looked to her with awe, silently hoping to learn from her example. Her presence alone now changed the squadron's dynamic. Where once there had been skepticism, there was now a quiet tension, part respect, part fear. Emily had demonstrated that she was capable of things beyond their comprehension. She didn't need to command respect. She had earned it through action. That evening, Emily sat quietly in the squadron's lounge, the hum of activity around her fading into the background. She reviewed her flight logs, checked her instruments, and studied radar simulations for the next mission. Even after her unprecedented success, she knew that war was continuous. Preparation was never complete. Complacency was dangerous. A young cadet approached hesitantly, eyes wide with admiration. "Ma'am, how did you do it? How did you stay calm while everything was collapsing around you?" Emily considered the question, then replied softly, "I trained for it. Every night, every mistake, every failure prepared me for moments like this. You focus on what you can control, anticipate what you can't, and never let fear dictate your actions. The cadet nodded, inspired, and left quietly, carrying the lesson with him. As the night deepened, whispers of her deeds spread through the base. Soldiers in the mess hall spoke of the pilot who had saved their lives. Mechanics recounted her precision and calm. Officers praised her decisiveness. Even those who had doubted her now spoke her name with reverence. Whisper. Yet Emily remained grounded. She did not seek accolades or attention. She did not boast. For her, the measure of success was simple. The convoy survived, and she had done her job. Everything else, praise, legend, recognition, was secondary. Still, she could not ignore the truth. She had become more than a pilot. She had become a symbol of excellence, courage, and skill, the embodiment of everything she had worked for. Since that small Midwestern town sparked her dreams, the following days were a blur of missions, briefings, and training exercises. Emily's name began appearing in classified reports, in internal communications, and on secure channels. Other squadrons spoke of the ghostly pilot who struck like lightning, vanishing before detection. The legend of Whisper began to grow, quietly, steadily. Pilots from other units requested to fly alongside her, hoping to learn from her methods. Commanders debated whether to keep her assignments solo or pair her with more experienced pilots. Each decision carried weight. Each mission demanded perfection. Emily embraced it all. The stakes were high, the enemy relentless, but she thrived in the chaos where skill and preparation outweighed strength and numbers. One evening, as Emily walked alone across the tarmac, the desert wind brushing against her flight suit, she paused to look up at the stars. The sky stretched endlessly above her, vast and silent. She thought of the convoy, the pilots she had inspired, the skeptics who now watched her differently. For years, she had been underestimated. For years, people had whispered that she couldn't. But now, they knew the truth. She smiled faintly, not for recognition or fame, but because she had proven to herself what she was capable of. Whisper was no longer just a calcine. Whisper was history in motion, a quiet force with an unstoppable purpose. And Emily Foster, small, determined, and precise, was just getting started. Emily Foster had grown used to whispers. She had learned to ignore the mocking voices, the skeptical glances, the dismissive laughter. But now, the whispers had transformed into something larger attention, beyond the walls of her squadron, beyond the base, even beyond the military channels she had always inhabited. Her calcine, Whisper, was spreading like wildfire. It started quietly. Emails from other units, messages from command, and cautious inquiries from journalists embedded with military publications. At first, Emily didn't respond. She wasn't seeking recognition. She didn't crave headlines or medals. Her only concern had ever been precision, control, and protecting the lives of those under her care. Yet the curiosity grew. A security officer tapped on her quarters door one afternoon, a manila folder in hand. "Cadet Foster, sir," he began formally. "You've been requested for a secure media interview. It's classified, but the information is cleared for military press purposes. Your story is inspiring morale across several units." Emily blinked. Morale? Inspiring? That had never been her goal. "I understand," she said, voice steady. "I'll cooperate." The officer nodded and left. She sat back on her bunk, thinking. Her life had been a series of calculations, drills, simulations, and missions. She had never imagined her actions would reach so far, that her precision and dedication would ripple outward beyond the base. Her first media engagement was tightly controlled. A small group of journalists, military approved and vetted, waited in a secure briefing room. Cameras were set up, microphones ready, but the questions were carefully scripted. Emily spoke clearly, calmly, recounting her missions in a way that honored the squadron and the personnel she had protected. "Were you afraid during the engagement?" one journalist asked. Emily paused, considering the words. Fear was always present. It was part of any pilot's life. But she had trained her mind to act, to anticipate, to control her response. Fear was acknowledged and set aside. I was focused, she replied. Fear is natural, but it cannot guide your actions in a mission. Preparation, observation, and discipline do. The journalists scribbled, nodded, and whispered among themselves. Emily's measured tone, her calm demeanor, and the clarity of her explanation impressed even the most skeptical of them. The story would be told not as sensationalism, but as a study in skill, precision, and professional excellence. Back at the squadron, reactions were mixed. Younger pilots were inspired, seeking to emulate her focus, her precision, and her composure. Veterans, who had once doubted her abilities, were forced to reconsider their assumptions. Some still struggled. With envy, others were awed. Emily, however, remained largely unaffected by the praise. Her focus remained on missions, preparation, and perfecting the craft she had honed for years. Russo, who had watched her rise from the small, underestimated cadet to the legend she now was, offered a rare comment. You're changing the game. Whisper, he said quietly. Not just in combat, but in how everyone thinks about what a pilot can do. Emily didn't respond. She simply nodded, acknowledging the truth, or reserving her energy for what mattered, the next flight. Despite the attention, life at the base returned to the same grueling rhythm. Dawn drills, midday simulations, and night missions were relentless. But Emily noticed a subtle shift among her squadron. Pilots were more disciplined, more attentive, and more willing to listen to her advice. Even the skeptics followed her lead during operations. One night, after a particularly grueling joint exercise with Allied forces, her wingman Daniels approached her quietly. You know, he said, I thought last night was incredible. I've flown for years, and I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that. You've got every one of us thinking differently now. Emily shrugged, brushing back sweat-soaked hair. It's not about me. It's about precision, preparation, and protecting the team. If one pilot fails, it affects everyone. Daniels shook his head in admiration, sensing that her calm resolve was something rare, almost untouchable. In the following weeks, Emily's legend only grew. Reports of her actions reached Allied bases overseas. Officers and pilots from other countries asked to review her flight logs, simulations, and debriefings. She became a case study in stealth tactics, precision strikes, and battlefield composure. For Emily, it was still business as usual. Every night, she returned to her bunk, reviewing tactics, simulating enemy maneuvers, and preparing for the next engagement. Her routine remained unchanged. The fame, the headlines, and the accolades were secondary. What mattered was skill, discipline, and the ability to act when it counted most. However, attention came with consequences. Whisper's actions had inspired both admiration and envy. Some pilots, even in her own squadron, were openly competitive, pushing themselves harder, trying to match her performance. While Emily encouraged skill and preparedness, she remained wary of reckless behavior that could jeopardize missions. One evening, the squadron gathered for a planning session. A young pilot, ambitious and brash, spoke up. I can handle this. Next mission solo, he said, almost challenging Emily. I want to prove I can do what she does. Emily studied him quietly, recognizing the determination and the danger. Skill alone isn't enough, she said softly. Preparation, understanding, and calm under pressure are what keep you alive. Don't let ego make you reckless. Her words were direct but measured. The young pilot nodded, chastened, silently acknowledging the truth. Emily's quiet influence was growing beyond her actions. She was shaping her squadron's culture, instilling discipline, precision, and patience. She became a mentor by example, not by command. Pilots who once laughed at her became attentive observers, learning the subtleties of stealth, timing, and battlefield anticipation. At night, when she lay in her bunk, she reflected on how far she had come. From the small town where she had first dreamed of flying, to the academy where she had been underestimated, to the desert skies where she had earned her legend. Her journey had been defined by discipline, focus, and relentless preparation. Whisper was no longer just a name. It was a standard, a benchmark of excellence. And Emily had no intention of slowing down. One late evening, as the stars emerged over the base, Emily walked the quiet tarmac, the desert wind tugging at her flight suit. She paused to look up at the constellations, a faint smile on her lips. For years, she had been underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. Now, her skill was undeniable. Pilots across the world whispered her name. The military analyzed her maneuvers. And stories of her precision inspired countless others. Yet she remained grounded, focused. Fame, recognition, and legend were fleeting. What endured was skill, preparation, and composure, the things that had kept her alive and allowed her to protect those who relied on her. Whisper's legend had spread far and wide, but Emily knew this. The mission was never about legend. It was about the next flight, the next challenge, the next life she could save. And she was ready. The desert sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the tarmac as Emily Foster prepared for what would be the most critical mission of her deployment. The intelligence reports were grim. A coordinated enemy offensive aimed at a critical supply route threatened not only U.S. and allied forces, but also civilian populations depending on the convoy. The stakes were higher than anything Emily had faced before. Her squadron gathered in the operations center, tension palpable. Maps, satellite feeds, and radar displays illuminated the room. The enemy had learned from prior engagements and was coming prepared. Faster aircraft, tighter formations, advanced radar detection systems. No margin for error. Russo, standing near her, gave a curt nod. "We trust you, Whisper. Lead the charge." Emily nodded silently, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about survival. It was about ensuring the lives of everyone under their protection. Her meticulous planning would have to meet the enemies cunning head-on. The flight briefing was intense. Every detail scrutinized, every potential scenario discussed. Emily listened, asked precise questions, and provided calculated suggestions. Her squadron watched, noting the calm efficiency that had become her trademark. Even those who had once doubted her now followed her example without question. As they prepared to take off, Emily's hands moved with practiced precision, checking each instrument, throttle, and radar display. She adjusted her helmet, clipped in her harness, and whispered a silent promise to herself. "I won't fail." The jets roared down the runway, lifting into the desert sky, leaving a trail of dust and anticipation. The first wave of enemy aircraft appeared on radar almost immediately, 13 fast-moving jets, formations tighter and more aggressive than before. Emily dropped low, hugging the terrain, her F-16 slipping under the enemy's radar like a shadow. She coordinated silently with her wingmen, guiding them through evasive maneuvers while simultaneously tracking the approaching threats. The first engagement began swiftly. Missiles streaked across the sky, flares erupted, and the deafening roar of jet engines filled the air. Emily's calm focus was a stark contrast to the chaos around her. She struck with surgical precision, selecting targets with care, timing every maneuver to perfection. The enemy attempted to adapt, splitting formation and sending interceptors toward the convoy. Emily anticipated each move, shifting altitude and speed, disappearing from radar. and reappearing where the enemy least expected. One by one, hostile. Jets fell under her coordinated assault. Her wingman, Daniels, marveled at her efficiency. "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like this," he muttered over the comms. Emily's voice was steady. "Focus on your flight path. Don't chase them blindly. Watch your radar and stay disciplined." The battle raged over the desert, each maneuver precise, each strike calculated. Emily's training, her years of study, and her countless simulations converged into flawless execution. By the time the enemy realized the full extent of the threat, half of their formation had already been eliminated. Amidst the chaos, Emily never lost sight of the convoy below. She adjusted her tactics to shield the vehicles from potential attack, guiding her squadron with quiet authority. Every decision was measured, every maneuver deliberate. The enemy, realizing they were being outmatched, tried to regroup. Emily anticipated their strategy, cutting off their escape paths, isolating targets, and striking with unwavering precision. 7 enemy jets destroyed, then 8, then 9. Each kill confirmed, each threat neutralized. Radio chatter filled with panic from the enemy. "We can't see her. Where is she? Shoot at anything." Anything. But Emily was already gone, maneuvering invisibly through the sky, striking before they could react. Her squadron, once skeptical, now operated as a cohesive unit under her guidance. Whisper wasn't just a pilot. She was the embodiment of strategy, precision, and calm under fire. As the engagement reached its climax, only the most aggressive enemy jets remained. Emily's focus was absolute. She coordinated simultaneous strikes, timed perfectly to avoid exposure, and executed evasive maneuvers that left her virtually untouchable. Every decision balanced risk with precision, every move calculated to protect the convoy while dismantling the enemy's formation. By the end of the battle, 15 enemy jets had entered the engagement. Not one had reached the convoy. 11 had been destroyed by Emily herself. The remaining 4 were neutralized by her squadron, guided by her precise commands. Silence fell over the desert as the last traces of smoke from the downed jets disappeared into the fading sunlight. The convoy was safe. Emily's jet glided back toward base, engines humming smoothly, as if nothing had occurred. Landing back at the base, Emily's arrival was met with awe and relief. Ground crews and fellow pilots paused, staring at the jet that had once again returned unscathed from impossible odds. Even those who had once doubted her now regarded her with deep respect. Rousseau approached, his expression a mixture of pride and disbelief. "I don't think anyone in this squadron has ever seen anything like that. You weren't just a pilot out there. You were a force of nature." Emily shook her head slightly, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "We did our job. That's all." Her humility was part of her legend. Whisper wasn't about ego or recognition. It was about precision, duty, and protecting lives. And the world had taken notice. News of the engagement spread quickly through military channels. Reports analyzed her strategies, praised her composure, and highlighted her extraordinary skill. Pilots across Allied bases studied her flight paths, her radar evasion techniques, and her methodical approach to the battlefield. Whisper had become more than a call sign. She was a case study in excellence, a symbol of what one well-trained, disciplined pilot could achieve under extreme conditions. Commanders requested briefings. Officers invited her to share tactics. And her story became a source of inspiration for young cadets and seasoned pilots alike. Yet Emily remained grounded, focused on the next mission, the next challenge, and the next life she could protect. That evening, Emily walked across the tarmac, her helmet under her arm, the desert wind tugging at her uniform. Stars stretched endlessly above, silent witnesses to the battles she had fought. The hum of engines from other aircraft took on a rhythmic pattern, blending with the desert night. She paused, taking in the vast sky she had mastered, reflecting on the journey from the small-town girl who dreamed of flying to the pilot who had become a legend. The memories of ridicule, doubt, and struggle flashed briefly in her mind. She remembered being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. And now, the same people who once doubted her watched her with respect, admiration, and awe. Whisper's legacy had been forged in the fire of necessity, precision, and calm resolve. She knew the work was never done. Each mission carried risk, each engagement demanded focus. But Emily also understood the truth she had learned long ago. Skill, preparation, and discipline were what defined a pilot, not accolades or recognition. The legend of Whisper would endure because it was grounded in action, in the lives she had protected, and in the meticulous mastery she demonstrated with every flight. And as Emily looked up at the stars, she whispered to herself, not for the world, not for the military, but for herself. This is only the beginning. The desert was quiet, but her presence in the skies had already left an indelible mark. Pilots would study her tactics for decades. Young cadets would strive to emulate her precision, and Whisper would live on, not as myth, but as the standard. For courage, discipline, and unwavering resolve in the face of impossible odds, Emily Foster had become more than a pilot. She had become a symbol. She had become a legacy. And in the silent vastness of the desert night, she felt ready for whatever the future held.